Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us this morning for Bright Blue's new event as part of our Past the Pandemic event series. And we're doing it in partnership with HP. So we're very grateful to them for this partnership. And indeed, Richard Ford from HP will be speaking on this panel. So this first event in this series is around a new world of work. And of course, COVID has disrupted our lives, and particularly the labour market. It's changed the number of jobs, the way we do work, and perhaps the type of work that we do in the future as well. So we want to think about beyond COVID, what's the new labour market going to look like, and what sort of role should policy play to support people in that transition to a new economy. So things like, what's the future of office work, homework, what we will be doing in the future? What's the kind of technology and security challenges that we might face with home working? And what extent are employees in the most exposed sectors at risk of long-term unemployment? And has government done enough in terms of the social security support it's offering, particularly to keep people's standard of living up, but also thinking about how they can reskill and retrain for the future. So if you're tweeting, please use the hashtag #PastThePandemic, and our Twitter handle is @WeAreBrightBlue, and we're also with HP, their Twitter handle is @HP. So to answer some of these questions and think into the future about the role of government and others for preparing for that new world of work, we've got an excellent panel. So we have Nadhim Zahawi MP, who is the Minister for Business and Industry. We have Francis O'Grady, who is the General Secretary of the TUC. Matthew Taylor, who is the Chief Executive of the Royal Society of Arts, and also the Chair of the Government Commissioned Review into the Future of Work under Theresa May's government, and Richard Ford, who is the Director of Enterprise Services and Solutions at HP. They're each going to speak for about 5 minutes each, and then we're going to open it up for questions from the floor. Of course, you aren't there in person, you're there virtually, so you're able to ask questions through the Slido function, which is on the web page. Please just tell us your name, your organisation, and what your question is, and I will read those out when we get to that point. So, a new world of work. Nadhim.
Thank you, Ryan, and thank you, everyone. Look, our guidance to work from home that was issued both in March and now again, I think has had a big impact on clearly both employers and employees. Many businesses have, therefore been compelled to make changes to their working arrangements and to incorporate things like remote working, greater use of technology, more flexible working hours. Some of the SMEs have had to take up technology. When you've had to lock down without your sales ledger, you very quickly search the internet and find apps or products that can help you continue to work. We think that flexible working is a good thing. And whilst nobody would have wished for this pandemic, I think it has forced businesses to consider some of the benefits of flexible working can bring. And I actually believe that this will have benefits going forward. And we want to see how we can capitalize on this. And it's sort of just worth at this point, just sort of thinking through. So the perceived economic wisdom of the past, 4, 5, 6, 7 decades is that you suck people into urban conurbation cities, and that's how you improve productivity and therefore GDP. I think the one silver lining, if there is one, of this pandemic is that actually people can, with the right technology, be linked together to be able to work remotely. I think it'll be a hybrid model. I was struck by my job essentially covers about 60% of the economy. So I cover every sector from manufacturing, high value manufacturing, steel as a foundation industry, to auto and aero, all the way to the life sciences, and then the professional and business services sectors, lawyers, accountants, consultants, digital marketeers, and so on. In one of those meetings, I was struck by one of the quotes from those businesses where they said, "Minister, you can probably manage a business on Zoom. It's much harder to grow a business on Zoom or any of the other platforms. You still need that sort of human interaction for the creative juices to flow, to build and grow businesses, to induct new people into a business, of course, as well." And so I think we will end up with a sort of hybrid model, in many ways helping with the leveling up agenda, because we can, if we get the infrastructure right digitally, people can work from their villages and homes for a period of the week, but they would also expect very high quality, efficient transport infrastructure to get them into the office space, to be able to have those interactions as well. And I think that the big advantage, and not necessarily in the sort of the office environment, but certainly in the manufacturing world, around SMEs, of the adoption of technology. And this was pre-COVID and pre my time. There's a pilot that we've run in Bays in the northwest of England with 1,000 businesses called Made Smarter, where it has really made a difference to their productivity by having very bespoke advice and help as to what technology they can introduce into the manufacturing process to help them become more productive, more efficient, and get better data out of their business. We're expanding that. I announced it at London Tech Week. Hardly got a mention, clearly, because the media currently is very much focused on COVID, obviously, and the challenge of COVID. But certainly will make a huge difference, I think, to the way SMEs continue to adopt technology. Currently, an employee with 26 weeks continuous service has a legal right to request flexible working. An employee can make an application to work flexibly in a variety of ways, whether it's job sharing, work from home, or staggered hours. And an employer will have 3 months to decide. Either they will agree. I think certainly when I used to be in the world of business as the co-founder of YouGov, in any business, your most valuable resource is your human resource. I think if people are happy at work, wherever they are, whether working from home or in the office, then they'll be more productive, in my view. So I think it actually in the interest of the employer to work with the employee in terms of flexibility. We want to build on these rights and on the many changes and adaptations I think that business have made during this pandemic, learn from them, scale them. So I'm grappling with how I can scale things like Made Smarter, and subject to further consultation, we will look to introduce steps to make flexible working the default, unless employers have a really good reason not to want it or allow it. This will likely take the form of an employment bill, again, subject to consultation, and it will ensure we retain many of the great benefits that are brought by the adaptations of working practices over the recent months. I think that's
great. Thank you. Yes, thank you very much, Nadhim. Great. And one thing which is quite interesting in this kind of drift to home working, which I don't think is just a kind of cyclical thing, but perhaps a structural one, which will go on beyond the pandemic, is one very good study I've seen from Stanford University, randomized control trial comparing home workers versus people in the office, Chinese core workers. And on the whole, the people who are at home, more productive, higher job satisfaction, higher job retention. So there's good evidence that home working on the whole is good for productivity. However, one thing that really did come through was that those people were less likely to be promoted. And I suppose the theory behind that is that particularly younger people are and not having the exposure to senior colleagues to learn from, to network, to gain mentors, which help them be promoted. So, the kind of drift to home working might be good, particularly if you're a family, it might be good for productivity, but do you worry about the effect on younger people? And of course, people have said as well, the pandemic is disproportionately hitting younger people in terms of their opportunities, both employment and leisure. So do you see a kind of problem with the drift to home working for younger workers?
Right, great question. I sort of tried to cover it with a sort of catch-all phrase about you can maintain a business, you can't really grow a business. And so if there's opportunities for growth, then there's an opportunity for promotion, obviously. And the other area, which obviously is of concern, is induction. How do you induct new starters in a business only remotely? I don't think it's a trade-off. It doesn't have to be either or. I don't think we're going to end up in a world where we all just work from home and the offices are closed permanently. I think the office environment will probably change. Back to what I was sort of referring to about the creative juices flowing. So the office environment will become much more of a place where you might go in half of the week and interact with your colleagues. We are ultimately pro-social animals. I don't think it'll be just let's all just sort of talk on a digital platform. There are massive advantages, including stuff that I've found. So when we're doing our recovery round tables, I'm able to link international investors from around the world to ask them what they think of the UK investment environment. It would have been much harder to have that interaction in just one call, where you're talking to people on sort of West Coast, East Coast, Singapore, Middle East, and Europe, all on the one call very quickly. And so there are great advantages, but I think there are shortcomings as well, which is why I don't think there are all sorts of headlines of the demise of the office. I don't believe we're going to end up in a world where everybody just works from home and that's it, because I think it goes against human nature.
So full-time home working, maybe good for the carbon emissions, but not so great for social interaction. So Francis, let's bring you in. So the TUC has been quite positive on the whole about what the government's been doing during the crisis. And of course, you've contributed your ideas a lot into the creation of the different iterations of the furloughing scheme. So obviously you might want to talk about that, but I'm also interested in your thoughts and your vision around the future workforce that we go into in several years' time.
Well, thank you, Ryan, and thanks for the invitation to keep involving the TUC and make sure that we have this broad dialogue, because I think that's really important. I was kind of amused by the friendly spat that broke out about who came up with the slogan "Build Back Better" first, with Boris Johnson unveiling it at the Conservative Party conference and Joe Biden's team pointing out he'd used it in July. I can exclusively reveal to you that the TUC was using it in April. However, I also have to be honest and admit that we nicked it from the United Nations. But I think what's interesting is that there is a broad consensus that life wasn't great before COVID, that there were things that were wrong with our labour market and economy that have to be put right, and that Build Back Better has to be more than a slogan, in which case, how are we going to do it? And certainly from the TUC's perspective, as you know, we've put forward quite detailed proposals on protecting good jobs, and we've worked closely with the government on the furlough and self-employed schemes, but also creating good jobs. And to do that, you need a clear mission and a clear and active industrial strategy, because I think what we know is that the pandemic exposed pretty deep and worsening inequalities along the lines of place, race, class in Britain, and that people have an appetite for something big to change, because we've all had this shake up about what really matters, what work is really valuable, and that we want something good to come out of this. So I think part of our thinking, whether it's, you know, good green jobs close to home, where issues like broadband and transport links are going to be really, really important, or whether it's creating more resilient public services, because many of us are a little bit worried that this won't be the end of the story and that we're going to have to see investment in health and education and social care to make up for some of the deficiencies we've seen all too well during this pandemic. But also there's a real appetite for not just any job, but decent work against a backdrop of growing unemployment, with young people on that first wave, young women in particular on that first wave, but increasingly, certainly in my experience, older workers facing redundancy too. And I can tell you, with the higher state pension age being made redundant when you're 60, and the prospect of getting another job, it feels pretty daunting. I'm fascinated too about this discussion about new working patterns and flexibility. You know, we've been doing a big exercise of polling and focus grouping with workers. And what we're hearing is that appetite for two-way flexibility, to be a two-way street. Sometimes we can become a bit obsessed with the office. Sometimes the problems people face are much more basic, like having a predictable shift and being compensated if you go into work and then the boss says, sorry, I haven't got any work for you now, you can go back. But this real sense of actually that people do value the company and creativity of being with other people. So I'd agree that these kind of predictions of death of the office are premature, but a real appetite for positive flexibility that allows people to spend more time with their kids and the people they love. And just finally from me, Ryan, you know, famously a previous Labour government had as its slogan, education, education, education. I think we need agreement in this country that we need skills, skills, skills. If we're going to have a just transition that allows people to earn a better living, do a more satisfying job, have more choice and power to be able to move between jobs, then people have got to be skilled up. And I know Nadhim will forgive me for this, but what a mistake to pull the plug on funding for Union Learn that helps over 200,000 mainly blue collar workers every year, 2/3 of them not a qualification to their name until the union helped them get there. So, you know, there's so much that we could do positively in creating a skills infrastructure that works for working people as well as for firms. And I would like to see an appetite to do things differently, to integrate that into the industrial strategy that you're leading, and to do better by blue collar Britain, because blue collar Britain has had a rough hand over the recent years. And I think we've got to do things better for sure. But we've also got to make sure that unions alongside business are part of that story. Thank you.
Thank you, Frances. That was great. Just on your final point about skills, 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 the government's flagship proposal out of COVID has been this lifetime loan entitlement, equivalent to kind of 4 years of an undergraduate degree, for learners to be able to spend on different types of training and education. Obviously, the details are still being worked out, and indeed it's something that Bright Blue, along with others, have been pushing for a long time, and we feel it's very learner-led, and you know, that's a positive thing, allowing them to kind of shape the type of courses that they want to do. Often there's a danger, obviously, if it comes through employers, they obviously want you to upskill and do the kind of that funding's there to help the business, rightly. But obviously, if it goes direct to the individuals, they have more choice over what they spend on, therefore enabling them to do reskilling as well if they want to change jobs. Do you think that loan entitlement, you know, that's the right sort of direction, or do you think a lot more needs to be done?
I'm personally very committed to the whole idea of lifelong learning and individuals having basic access, universal access to good advice and coaching. That's what workers tell us is absolutely critical. And for goodness sake, in the 21st century, with the possibility of digital offers on that front, we ought to be able to offer that universally. And people being able to develop and having that kind of human aspect as well, because all our experience is that when people get the learning bug, as it were, you know, they become much more confident about trying new things, particularly during important points in your life, like if you have a new baby or, you know, you're moving town. Those are the points where people are really open to getting new skills. But I think it's not just a problem of demand, it's a problem of supply. Until we really create those decent jobs that allow people to progress, that demand higher skills and pay a better wage, then, you know, we can train people up forever, but we need the good jobs for them to go to. And, you know, we've seen that with Kickstart, you know, a good initiative. We'd like improvements, but a good initiative, a good thought in terms of trying to provide opportunities for young people, but a very low take up from employers currently. So how do we shift that dial?
Yes, I also feel that the Kickstart needs a bit of a kickstart itself. It is being quite delayed at the moment. Some feedback there for you, Nadhim. So Matthew, on to you. So you've been thinking very deeply for a long time about work, and in particular, the kind of how do we get more secure, rewarding, purposeful work? I mean, what's your view on COVID? How has COVID changed the kind of direction towards that? The positives, but also the negatives that have emerged from the virus.
Thanks, Ryan. So I ought to say that as well as being Chief Executive of the RSA, I'm also part-time Interim Director of Labour Market Enforcement, working with the government in relation to labour market compliance and enforcement, which is an interesting topic in itself, but I'm obviously not speaking in that official capacity today. Let me just start by saying some stuff about work quality. So the first thing to say, I think, is we more or less know what good work is. Now, that isn't to say that there isn't an element of subjectivity in people's experience of work. And clearly, being a pizza courier in your summer holidays as a student is very different from relying on that as your sole source of income if you're the only earner in a household. So there's an element of subjectivity to it. There's an element of your life circumstances to it. But nevertheless, we kind of know what the components of good work are. There's been a lot of research done on that, and the RSA published a report with Carnegie, I think, last year or the year before on that, to which organizations like the TUC contributed. So we know what good work is. The question is, do we think that it is possible for all work to be good work, and are we committed to a good work economy? I'll just remind you very quickly of the reasons that I gave in the good work report that I produced for Theresa May as to why I think good work matters. And I argue that it matters firstly because of fairness, because like too many things in our society, bad stuff goes together. And so therefore the people who are in the lowest paid work and the most insecure work also suffer from other elements of bad work. So bad work is clustered at the bottom of the labour market, bad quality work. So improving work quality is an element of any social fairness strategy. Secondly, in relation to health, that bad work is bad for your health. And it's not only bad for people who suffer it, but one of the reasons you have to wait a long time to see your GP is because there may be people ahead of you in the queue who are unwell because of the stresses and strains of their work, or who have fallen out of work. Thirdly, bad work tends to have poor productivity. And as we all know, we have a productivity problem in this country. It takes us 5 days to produce what the average German worker produces in 4 days. A big part of that seems to be to do with poor management. Fourthly, because we live in a world of rapid technological change, and one of the things that we should be concerned about is the degree of pessimism that people feel about technology. RSA research finds that most workers, whilst they don't think technology necessarily threatens their job, what they do think is that technology will mean their job deteriorates, that they will lose control, that their work will become more stressful. And finally, good work matters because we assert in wider society that we want people to be active and involved and, to coin a phrase, to take back control. But we seem not to apply that to the workplace. So the idea is that you should be active and involved outside work, but still when you go into work, the deal is that the people who pay you have the right to tell you what to do, and you really shouldn't be answering back. So I think if we believe in a rich notion of citizenship in civil society, we should believe in citizenship at work as well. Now, in relation to COVID, Ryan, and the question you asked there, well, I think on the one hand, there are enormous opportunities. What we've seen in COVID is a strengthening of solidarity. We've seen an appreciation of the role of key workers, whether they are delivery drivers or social care workers. We've seen an awareness of the gap sometimes between people's market value and their social value, because we needed couriers, we needed social care nurses, we needed people volunteering in food banks. Corporate bankers, well, not quite so much in the last few months. So that's been interesting. Secondly, I think there's been a really strong emphasis, and really this is a new thing and a very powerful thing, on well-being. You know, when I talk to organizations, and I do all the time, there's a deep commitment amongst good employers to think about well-being in ways that they really didn't think about it before. A much richer idea of well-being, not just about health and safety, but a deeper idea of people feeling a sense of fulfillment and security at work. And that's another thing which has also been really interesting, is the kind of breakdown of hierarchy. Organizations have had to work in much flatter, much more spontaneous ways. And that means that it's kind of tested the rather lazy triangular organogram that we tend to think of when we think of organizations. And, you know, whether it's, you know, the chief executive I spoke to the other day, who's gone from having a 3-monthly, rather tedious presentation to their staff, a paternalistic one, to a weekly fireside chat, or the organizations having really regular surveys of their staff to try and find out how they're dealing with things like working from home. You know, we're seeing hierarchy being subverted, and that, I think, offers opportunities for much more imaginative ways of organizing people's work in ways that give them more autonomy and more voice. And as the minister said, more concretely, we have the opportunity of an employment bill. The government is committed to an employment bill, and that could help us grapple with big issues like employment status, which is a really big problem. People, organizations misdescribing people as self-employed in ways which are problematic in terms of people's employment protection and rights, but also in terms of revenues to pay for public services, strengthening protections for precarious workers. And there are simple things the government could do, and that have been recommended to them by the Low Pay Commission, that they should get on with. And also the exciting opportunity to establish a single enforcement body to really strengthen labour market enforcement and compliance and address the kinds of issues that have been exposed this year in Leicester garment factories. But I want to end, and I probably shouldn't end like this, but I want to end with the fact there's also a danger, which is that, you know, when I worked for a Labour government, I wanted to talk about work quality a lot. And basically, I was told to shut up whenever I did, because the view then was a view that was captured by the phrase work first. And that view was, look, all that really matters is getting people into work, regardless of the quality of the work. And that is an understandable perspective, because it is the case that almost, and I emphasize almost all work is better than no work for people's well-being and their life chances. And the danger we face as unemployment rises is that that view takes hold again in Whitehall. And there's a view which says that we can't afford to talk about quality of work or workers' rights or the government's commendable ambition to raise the minimum wage to the point at which we effectively abolish poverty pay. We can't afford any of that. All our energy has got to go into addressing unemployment. And I want to say at the end, we mustn't fall for that. It is a false dichotomy. In the end, there doesn't have to be a trade-off between quantity of work and quality of work. And if nothing else, that is the critical thing for us to grasp right now, and to continue to try to advance the good work agenda whilst also addressing the urgent need to address rising unemployment.
Great stuff. Typically very thoughtful there, Matthew. And to say to everybody watching, if you've got questions, please do send them through the Slido function, which is on the webpage. No doubt, lots of questions for the speakers. Just one thought, Matthew, which is you mentioned how there's changing perceptions towards the value that particularly key workers are providing relative to, say, corporate bankers. And there's lots of good books out at the moment on how we've been pricing, how the system prizes a kind of academic cognitive elite for a long time. So Michael Sandel, David Goodhart, Michael Sandel, and we've got to find a way of better rewarding people who contribute a lot through the jobs through their heart or their hands, for example. And Bright Blue's just brought out a report saying that migrant workers who have been key workers during the pandemic, perhaps we could reward them by saying, okay, fast track to British citizenship. Instead of 5 years waiting for residency, 2 years, reduce your residency fees, have free citizenship. So a reward there for non-citizens who have been working during the pandemic on the front line. But are there other things, particularly for people who are not migrants, we can be doing? What sort of policies can we do? Is what's government capable of doing to better reward those types of key workers?
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. And actually, funnily enough, I've got David Goodhart on my podcast, Bridges to the Future, next week. I just thought I'd give that a plug. I think that this question of how we value people is important. I want to say again that I think the government's commitment to raising the minimum wage is a very important commitment. And it's vital that we encourage the government to stick to that, because that will make a real difference for people at the bottom of the labour market. But then I think what we have to do more than anything else is look at sectors as a whole and explore how sectors as a whole can be changed into good work sectors. Because actually, I think that the reasons why we saw what we saw in Leicester are partly to do with companies not taking their responsibilities seriously. And I hope as well that the government will look at the issue of joint liability and joint responsibility within supply chains. And it is about individual misdemeanors, but it's also about the fact that the fast fashion industry is arranged in a way which makes it almost inconceivable that workers can be treated well in that system, because there is a consumer expectation and demand for very cheap, very fast clothes. And I think that whether it's social care or fast fashion or food manufacture, the biggest manufacturing sector in the UK is food. And it is a sector, generally speaking, of pretty terrible work. So I think that one of the ways I'd want to look at this is to look at sectors as a whole and think about how you can bring together employers, trade unions, civil society, consumer groups, and explore how that whole sector can be set on a different qualitative path. And so that's one of the things that I think we should be doing more of. And the one thing that worries me slightly is that the old industrial strategy, I'm on the government's Industrial Strategy Council, was doing work at sectoral level. I don't think it was as brilliant as it could be, but at least there was an attempt through sector deals to bring sectors together and to start to explore the idea of how sectors could go on that qualitative journey towards higher productivity and better work. And from what I understand, the intention with the industrial strategy kind of 2.0 is that it should be more exclusively focused on the kind of science and technology sectors. Well, maybe that's right, but I don't think the government should give up trying to convene sectors to explore how they can change, because it's only by that kind of sectoral convening that we can start to reimagine some of our low productivity, low wage sectors and think about how they could be fundamentally different.
Great, thank you, Matthew. I mean, I've certainly found in government a kind of orthodox argument when you talk about sectoral or regional approaches to things like minimum wage or migration, is we don't want to do that because it's distortive of the labour market. And that seems to be the kind of orthodox argument. But it's interesting what you say. Now to Richard, from a kind of private sector perspective about the future of work.
Thank you, Ryan, and pleasure to be here and amongst such distinguished guests, so thank you. So look, I'm going to come at this from a couple of perspectives. Obviously, my organisation, HP, is one of the largest technology companies globally. So I have a customer view. We're working with thousands of customers on a daily basis, helping them make technology decisions across a broad spectrum of both commercial and public sector, and those are both small and large organizations. I also manage a team on a day-to-day basis, and some of the things that the Minister touched on earlier in terms of onboarding, this year was the first year that we had to bring on our whole intern cohort remotely and onboard them, and that was extremely challenging. And also bringing on new employees as well has been incredibly challenging, but we've managed to find a way. My whole sales force, and there's over 100 that are customer facing on a daily basis, have had to pivot from being out and meeting them face to face to actually working 100% in a virtual environment, which again, and our key kind of mantra there is really to move towards trying to develop those skills to become digital natives. If I look at it in terms of the wider thing and across the piece, the pandemic has pretty much catapulted organizations into having to find new ways of working and creating an environment that reflects the need to re-architect work models. Where we're coming from is that we must embrace change as a catalyst for innovation. We have the opportunity to reinvent the way work gets done, and this will have huge implications across a variety of industry sectors like healthcare, education, and retail, to name a few. So, new technologies like augmented reality, virtual reality, leveraging artificial intelligence and the Internet of Things will create new business models, and we've already seen that happening. And there will be a need for digital skills, obviously, off the back of that. The one thing that has been absolutely key as we've gone through this, and we've been working remotely for the last 9 months as an organization, but working with customers has massively accelerated their digitization strategy. And obviously, remote working has also highlighted the need for the reskilling that I talked about earlier. However, in addition to that, it's also highlighted the flaws that some organizations have in being able to manage a remote workforce and the security implications that come with that as well. So it's no surprise that, for instance, 2020, we will see the largest amount of cybersecurity attacks off the back of COVID-19 malware. So it's a significant jump across the board. And there was a survey that was done by VMware that said 91% of organizations that were surveyed had seen a significant increase in cyber attacks to their businesses for employees working from home. So this is a significant challenge. HP furthermore conducted a workforce evolution study, which was involved across a number of countries. So the US, Spain, Italy, France, and Germany. And this was basically reaching out to 6,000 employees. And what we found from that is that employees believe that this disruption will create better ways for them working. And actually, the study found that 3 in 5 employees, and I think this touches on some of the comments that were made earlier, say that they would actually continue to prefer working remotely. And I think work-life balance was one of the things that was touched on earlier. I would go on to say that despite this, the initial levels of increased productivity that we saw at the beginning of the pandemic and in the initial lockdown, what we started to see is a bit of a drop off now. And I think this was touched on before. I mean, I can tell you in sales, we're social butterflies, the need to interact with people on a daily basis. And whether it's just having a coffee and a catch up and those things, those have all gone. And I think, the challenge we have is ensuring that employees remain connected. And we've gone through weekly calls. I think one of your guests touched on that earlier. I think Matthew said the need to have weekly calls. So I do think that social interaction is absolutely going to be key going forward. I will hand back to you at this point, Ryan.
Great, thank you, Richard. I mean, it's interesting because obviously we're talking about the kind of most immediate crisis, which is COVID and the impact on work. You know, for a long time before the pandemic, it was technology and automation. And I'm interested in that because some people say, well, actually, that's been overhyped. Before COVID, we had record levels of employment. It wasn't as if robots were taking over our jobs. And I think I've seen in an RSA report something like, you know, fewer than 5% of jobs today are ones which are completely new that didn't exist in the 1970s. So, I mean, on technology, do you think it's going to have this such profound effect on the volume of work and the type of work that we do? Or do you think that's been exaggerated?
I think if you go throughout history, I mean, technology has also always enabled us to evolve. And I think whether it's some of the technologies I touched on earlier, whether it's virtual reality, augmented reality, the use of AI, which is becoming more and more prolific to drive various business models. My view is it enhances, it makes us more productive. It enables us to move forward. And I think what we've seen historically is that the jobs that are maybe left or changed, new jobs are created as a result of that. And we've seen that time and time again throughout the, you know, if you go back to, you know, to the 50s and 60s, new technology coming on board into the computer age, into the 80s. Each time that we've had this claim made that it will effectively remove work from people, we've seen new opportunities, new job creation made as a result of that.
Nadhim, what do you think about that? Technology, friend or foe for workers?
I think friend. I just want to pick up on what Matthew Taylor spoke about, both in terms of the challenges of what good work looks like and some sectors of the economy where I think, Matthew, you're absolutely right. And, you know, I've had these discussions with Andy Haldane as well, who pretty much agrees with your point around sector deals. So you look at what we've done in nuclear with a sector deal there, where you bring the sector together and then challenge it to say, you know, how do we bring diversity into the nuclear sector? You know, the industry knows it's far too male and pale. So that is carrying on, Matthew. We've got a sector deal with the chemical sector that we're working on. If you map the chemicals industry and the sort of what the media refer to as sort of the red wall seats, or the areas where we want to see real leveling up happening, it maps pretty well. So we're looking at, you know, very ambitious sector deals with those sector transformation of the steel industry, another area of you know, a lot of work going into that. And I would pay tribute to the unions in the work we do with them, certainly in both the British Steel challenge that we had, and of course during COVID with other manufacturers in that industry. Just on fast fashions, I know a little bit about this area. Many decades ago, before my sort of lucky break at YouGov, I used to work in that industry. And you say that, you know, maybe customer demand expectations just doesn't allow you to create good jobs. I don't agree with that, Matthew. And I tell you for why. If you talk to the really good practitioners, the good leaders in that industry, so Nick Baton at ASOS comes to mind, where, you know, they've built a business that's, you know, £3 billion strong. Actually, yes, of course, customer demand wants the latest fashions very quickly. It lends itself to bringing back those jobs to Leicester. The difference being is when you talk to someone like Nick, he'll say to you that we can introduce technology into the supply chain because we take our responsibility seriously as sort of the top of that supply chain, top of the tree, that allows you to see how well that work is being treated, how, you know, honest that supply is being, and, you know, whether it's the latest sewing machines with cameras that can see and track the garments being made, or just understanding, if a supplier is saying to you, he can do this in X days, with his capacity, it cannot be just all happening in the one place. And so I think good leadership there will make a huge difference. And it's an opportunity rather than a sort of something that's to be brushed aside and brushed under the carpet. And I think we need to work with local leaderships in Leicester to take that opportunity in many ways. And so I think that there's real opportunity that technology allows you to create that environment of really good jobs. Now, it's much easier in sectors like I was in technology and data at YouGov. It's much easier in life sciences, where we've created through the sector deals, and we're on our third iteration of a sector deal now, an environment where last quarter, I think we got the largest inwards investment we've ever had, which is of £1 billion in the sector. But that doesn't sort of negate or take away from why we shouldn't lean in to some of the more foundation industries like steel and other sectors in the United Kingdom.
Great. Let's bring questions in now, and if people want to kind of respond to some of what Nadhim has said, perhaps they can weave that into some of their answers. But I'm keen to bring it in. So we'll start here with a question from Charlie, who has asked: government has placed a lot of energy into protecting jobs, which is good, but less into job creation in key sectors. Should there be more focus on job creation in key sectors? Francis, maybe you want to answer. You're muted, Francis.
Apologies. The answer is yes. I think we've now, clearly I think that there has been an issue about prioritising, sequencing. It was really, really important to ensure that we didn't see a meltdown in particular industries and particular grouped parts of the workforce that were facing unemployment, poverty, and we know the impact that has on society as a whole. But I think there is a growing frustration now that we have been talking about industrial strategy. This isn't a partisan point for many years. I think there's a kind of, okay, roll up our sleeves, let's deliver it. And would agree that if we're going to tackle some of those issues, not just about how do we get the high value jobs and push up the UK's productivity, but also concern about where are the jobs, because the truth is in Britain today, we've got huge swathes of people employed in areas like retail, hospitality, security. We have to pay some attention to what's happening to those sectors too. It can't just be, if you like, the glamorous new green jobs of the future. We've got to deal with where we are now and what we can do to upgrade firms themselves. Again, I've heard a lot of talk about restructuring. Very often working families pay a very high price for that. The more that we can get firms to change through Made Smarter, Be the Business, other kind of initiatives, the better, it seems to me.
And Nadhim, what do you think about this approach? I mean, sometimes Conservatives are a bit sceptical because it's kind of picking winners approach. Do you take that view?
Well, I think it's not about picking winners, and it would be unwise to attempt to even pick winners. But what you can do, which is what the industrial strategy refresh is all about, which my Secretary of State, Alok Sharma, pledged at the CBI conference, will be delivered first quarter of 2021, is about looking at sector, place, and the most valuable resource, the human resource, skills. And I think that continues to be fundamentally what Matthew and Andy and the team have done with the industrial strategy. It's a great piece of work. It was developed in a world of near full employment, as the economists would describe it, in 2017. The reason for the refresh is we're in a different place. And to the question that Charlie posed us, what are we going to do about job creation? And I think that's exactly the challenge around the refresh of the industrial strategy. What you look at is, okay, we're about to publish an energy white paper that will set the roadmap to 2050, right? We want to create or go from 500,000 jobs in green jobs to 2 million jobs in green jobs. Well, how are we going to deliver that? So we need businesses react to signals, right? And the energy white paper is going to be an important signal to demonstrate the roadmap. Okay, so what does the energy generation portfolio look like? Nuclear will play a big part in that. Offshore wind is going to play a big part of that, but we're going to learn the lessons of offshore wind. Today, we generate 36% of the whole of the planet's offshore wind energy production out of the United Kingdom, 36%. But have we kept the jobs in the UK? Have we got the supply chain in the UK? And they're the sort of lessons or the challenge that I challenge myself in wanting to deliver. Of course, we write them into the CFD contract saying 60% has to be in the UK, but is it really being delivered? That is the challenge that faces us. Then I look at the national infrastructure strategy. We're looking to invest 640 billion in infrastructure, 2/3 of a trillion. Are we going to be able to do that in viable projects? Hence why we set up Project Speed, that is led by the Chancellor, to see whether we can cut through some of the impediments to that investment into schools program, hospitals program, transport infrastructure, digital infrastructure, and so on. So I think it's not about picking winners. It's about saying, what sectors do we have a relative advantage in? But life sciences, I think we can go even further. Green growth, there's already emerging some exceptional innovation. Can we be as good at the D as we are with the R? We're great at research. If we can be as good at in D as we are in R, then we begin to deal with some of that productivity challenge that Matthew set us. So I'm excited about the future. It isn't about picking winners. It's about saying, actually, these are the sectors we want to grow, and there are some sectors we have to transform. So you look at North Sea oil and gas, right? There are some assets there that lend themselves to carbon capture, usage, and storage. So part of the energy white paper, the follow-up is then the hydrogen strategy, first quarter of next year, that we're working on. All these things need sort of very careful thought and integration, and then ultimately, okay, so how are we going to deliver some of this big ambition and sort of transition oil and gas towards green growth?
Great, thanks, Nadhim. Very, very interesting stuff. Let's take some more questions. So Matthew, you have another Matthew is a fan. So Matthew Maguire says, brilliant insights on the quality of work, Matthew. Could the job retention scheme or the Kickstart scheme enable people to do some self-directed volunteering for better quality work?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting idea. And, I think that when the government supports business, it is an opportunity to also nudge business to do things in different ways. So it is also an opportunity to nudge business in the direction of good work. And the simple reality is that now and into the future, a lot of businesses are going to be relying on the government, but also, as the TUC has argued a lot in the past, public procurement is also an opportunity to encourage those people who are funded through the public purse to exemplify, good work, but also innovation in relation to work. For example, in terms of encouraging people to be learning at work, volunteering at work. Look, I don't want to be kind of misty-eyed about this, but ultimately, ever since really the Industrial Revolution, we have adopted this notion of work, an instrumental notion of work, which is that for a lot of people, work is something that you do in order to pay the bills. And our ambition must be, and this is not some kind of weird socialist planning utopia, but it's a simple humanistic ambition, that people's work should be how they fill themselves, how they express themselves, how it is they live the best life that they can lead. And how we get there will be a long and complex road, but that should be the ambition that we have. And I absolutely, I agree that, a great job would be a job which not only did you feel fulfilled and excited in doing it, but it was one where you learned new skills and competencies, and maybe one which also gave you scope to give something back to society. And a lot of that happens at the top end of the labour market. At the top end of the labour market, a lot of employers do give their employees time off to volunteer or be school governors or whatever, because they understand it actually strengthens people's motivation. It gives people a broader perspective. You ain't going to get that kind of thing if you're plucking chickens or a security guard. And so that's one of the reasons why this quality of work agenda is linked to fairness. Just very briefly on the minister's points about sectors. I mean, look, what I've heard from the fast fashion industry is, yes, there's good practice, but I also heard, good companies deeply frustrated because they knew bad things were going on and they didn't feel anything was being done about it. And they felt that they were being undercut by those who were willing to play fast and loose with the regulations. And that's why I think you do need a kind of sectoral approach, because actually most employers, and Francis will, I'm sure, agree with this, most employers want the rules to be stuck to. They don't want rogue employers because they want to compete on the basis of innovation and effectiveness, not on the basis of people's capacity to play the system or cheat, right? So most employers want a strong system of compliance and enforcement. And that's why, the issue about fast fashion that I heard most often, way before Leicester was exposed, was people in the industry saying, we know that there are businesses out there that are undercutting us because they're not abiding by the rules. And that needs to be addressed on a sector level. But then equally, when it comes to sectors, we have to think about, in the medium term, those sectors where we find it, look, before COVID, we had massive issues about recruitment. IPPR had predicted that we would be 250,000 social care workers short of where we needed to be by the end of this decade. This summer, even as unemployment rose, the government tried to persuade more British workers to go and work on the land. And it wasn't an enormous success because what those workers found were not the kind of conditions they wanted to work in. So, part of the story we've got to have here is say, well, in the longer term, what would agricultural work need to be like if it was going to attract workers, potentially in the context where we've got many fewer migrant workers? What kind of social care work do we want that is going to attract people to think that care can be a profession and not something which is either a last resort or something which involves immense self-sacrifice because you put your heart into it, but you end up economically precarious? So this conversation about sectors in certain sectors has got to say, look, what is our vision of a sustainable, high quality sector? And we do have too many sectors where I don't think we know what that is. And so actually what you've got is businesses grasping around, trying to keep their head above water in a situation which isn't probably ultimately sustainable.
Great, thank you, Matthew, and very eloquently put, especially the first point you made. Francis, there's a question here from Matt Vickers from Ombudsman Services, who asks, service workers interact with anxious customers while facing huge anxiety themselves. How might leaders tackle the emotional challenges ahead for workforces?
Such a good question. And I think, again, that's one that's been made really vivid through this crisis, hasn't it? Where the awful truth is that shop workers are experiencing more abuse, spitting and other bad behaviour than they have during normal times. And that does feel kind of like the product of a collective fear and anxiety where people end up behaving badly because people are scared. I kind of totally agree with some of the comments that were made earlier about the work that we've all done together on health and safety, and that needs to embrace well-being and mental health too. I think that's become really clear through this crisis and will continue beyond it. I do think sometimes there's a difference between some of our kind of aspirational discussion and what's actually going on out there. So, you know, at a really basic level, Nadhim knows we all put huge amounts of work into those guidelines, government guidelines. All of us really putting our heads together and doing the best that we could in really, you know, a fast moving situation. Our latest check is that 4 in 10 workers have never seen sight nor sound of a risk assessment. And for a similar number are not benefiting from social distancing at work and not getting the, if you like, substitute of PPE, where social distancing at work isn't always possible. That's pretty alarming. That's pretty alarming, I think. And again, I think it's one where we need to think again about how do we make that work? Because while I'm all in favour of nudging, sometimes that nudging needs to be a bit tougher and harder than others, because we can't have the bad employers undercutting the decent ones. It drags everybody down, and that's true not just for health and safety and pay. You know, look at who's paying their taxes. Look at who's made a lot of money out of this crisis and who hasn't. You know, who's making redundancies? Not Amazon, but Marks and Spencer's is. You know, who's paying what amount of tax into the collective pot to fund our public services for the future. So I think that there, as I say, I believe there is an appetite for a level playing field, for a sharing of power and voice that we haven't seen for some time. And I think we perhaps need to kind of, you know, acknowledge that and put in place the structures and the support that will make it happen.
Great, thanks, Frances. I've got a question now from one of your colleagues, Richard, Ty Brooke, who asks, with more people set to work at home after COVID, how can both government and businesses encourage people and employees to use greener technology when they work from home? So Richard, maybe you want to come in on that, and then I might ask the Minister as well.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, look, I go back to, if you know, and I think it was touched on earlier, the cleaner air, less carbon emissions during the lockdown, and the benefit that we saw in terms of cleaner air and cleaner water overall. I think we all kind of enjoyed that. What we also saw is obviously the power of technology to keep people connected. But what is really important is that the technology that we deploy helps to drive sustainability and enable this green transition. And I think government and businesses can support the use of greener technology by including clear green criteria in their procurement decisions. You know, and I would say from an HP standpoint, certainly sustainability is core to the design of our products. We apply rigorous sustainable design principles. We're using, for example, our latest Dragonfly PC laptop is got 80% recycled materials and is use of ocean-bound plastics. One example. Another goal we have is to reduce a commitment to 75%, a commitment to 75% single-use plastic being eliminated by 2025, as well as 0% deforestation in paper. So this is fundamental, and it's, as I said, it's key, and we need to make sure that, as I said, government and businesses are pushing that and demanding greener technology when they're going to market.
So Nadhim, so the whole net zero agenda now is obviously a legal necessity, and I suppose the way that people interact with workplaces, thinking about buildings and transport, how they get to work, they're big emitting sectors. So obviously, you know, employers and the world of work also needs to decarbonize quite rapidly. So interested in your perspectives on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in the short term, we announced the £2 billion for transformation of homes, which is a challenge to get out the door by March of next year. But it's happening in terms of making people's homes better insulated and greener, and £1 billion for public buildings. But that's part of a much greater, you're seeing some announcements, that another one today from Secretary of State for Transport around cycling and walking in England, 175 million. But it's a part of a much greater transport decarbonising strategy that BEIS and the Department of Transport are working on. I think, in many ways, if there is a silver lining to COVID, it is the adoption of technology we've spoken about, and some of the advantages of that, but also around transport and adoption of different modes of transport. And you're going to hear more about that, both in terms of our ambitions for EV and charging infrastructure, but also, as I said earlier, the hydrogen strategy. And so I think in many ways, some of this stuff is now accelerated. But you're right. As someone who spent 10 years of my life observing human behavior at YouGov and sort of reporting on it and advising on it, at the moment we adopted the net zero by 2050 as the sort of the law of the land, you immediately saw the sort of the great machinery of government, every department beginning to crank and get to work in terms of what does that really mean? How are we going to get there? And you're going to see more on that from the Prime Minister and, of course, each and every department as well.
Great, thanks. Just a final question, because I'm conscious of time, which is, I'm just going to combine two questions, because really, at their core, they're about bringing more people into the UK labour market, or increasing the diversity of people who can benefit from good jobs in the labour market. So one from Phoebe asks around, the pandemic has changed childcare responsibilities in the home, and fathers are taking on more responsibilities, allowing mothers to engage in the workforce with more flexibility. And can government build on that after the pandemic? And so that's about sort of women. The second, I suppose, is around migrant workers. So can remote working make it easier, particularly for SMEs, to source talent globally? And is that a good thing in the long term, considering the government's previous record on migration and wanting to bring down migration in the UK? And that's a question from Patrick. So, Matthew, I don't know if you had any thoughts on
that. Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of I'll be very brief. So I think in terms of the gender issue, I would say that the priority is to address those, sectors of the economy, and also those sectors which are most threatened by automation, because those tend to be, on the whole, they are more, they tend to be areas of higher female employment. And actually, if you look at what's happened in the labour market in the last few years, professional women have improved their position, not reached parity by any means. And things like equal pay reporting will hopefully make further progress there. The real challenge, I think, is, again, at the bottom end of the labour market, and low paid women who often don't have the kind of flexibility we might want and are having to combine domestic and work responsibilities. So, I think, generally speaking, action to improve security and flexibility and quality of work will benefit women more than men, because of women's concentration in some of those lowest paid sectors. In relation to, remind me your second point, Ryan. Sorry.
I should be mastering that, but never mind. The question is around sourcing, SMEs being able to source talent from overseas.
So I think this is really important issue, and we haven't got into it at all today, but I just say in passing, one of the reasons why it's really important that the government grasps the nettle of employment status in its employment bill is that there genuinely is a danger that we will see a further process of casualisation. We will see the growth of gig work, that in a situation of economic insecurity, that employers will seek to outsource risk to their workers. And I am, in favor of flexible work. I'm in favor of people having the opportunities of self-employment if it works for them. But it has got to be done in a way that is fair. It's got to be done in a way that doesn't leave self-employed people, as we saw during the crisis. The government has addressed it, but not been able to fully address it, in a precarious position. And also importantly, it's got to be done in a way that is sustainable fiscally, because the reality is that when employers manage to characterize somebody as a self-employed person, that person pays less national insurance, but a much bigger issue is the organization pays no national insurance, and it creates a fiscal black hole. So if we want flexibility, people being able to work from home, people being able to work from abroad, that's all fine, but you've got to have the right, fair, sustainable, reasonable regulatory framework for that, or else we will all lose out.
Yeah, and I think the Chancellor has indicated sort of looking at the contributions that self-employed people make relative to...
Well, no, Ryan, I'm sorry. I know you're running out of time, but it's so important, this. It's not really about the contribution the individual makes. It's the contribution we make. If I hire employed labor, I have to pay indirectly national insurance. If I employ self-employed labor, I don't. And that's the big challenge. And there is no rationale for that. What we should do is tax all labor at the same level. If we did that, we raise a bit more money, which we could hopefully we could use to give more support to self-employed workers, and we would massively reduce the incentive which exists for organizations to misportray people as self-employed or to casualize people. So there's a very simple solution: a flat tax on labor, regardless of the way in which it's provided.
Okay, very interesting. And Bright Blue is doing some work actually on tax, looking at this sort of thing. So very interesting. Noted. Very quickly, Richard, I don't know if you had any thoughts, and then we'll go to Francis and the Minister.
No, not from me. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Francis.
Just a couple of things. One is that I think this issue about built in Britain is really, really important. If those people who believe that coming out of the EU and a new point system would reduce competition for jobs merely find that there's a new wave of jobs being outsourced, I think that's a major political challenge for this government. So how do we ensure, how does that industrial strategy build those supply chains, encourage that conditionality that actually does, at the end of the day, deliver good jobs in the places where they're needed most? Secondly, just on diversity, I think there may be some women on this call who would contest the idea that lockdown has led to a more equal division of labour in the home. I'm not sure the evidence supports that, and for sure, we're hearing from lots of women, especially in this second lockdown, who are really, really struggling now with trying to do a job, ending up cutting their hours, feeling on the periphery now of what's happening at work because they're trying to cope with looking after kids, with a lot of nurseries in trouble in the lead up to Christmas. That pressure is on. So we have to look at all of this work through the eyes of women, please, and not just through men. And just one final word from me, clearly race, gender, it's all been up there in terms of the impact, and age. But we also need to look at disability, because I was really shocked by what's happening now in the jobs market for people with disabilities, where it's really hard to quite literally even get in the door. And now it's even harder. So I think that's an area that requires attention too.
Great, thanks, Francis. And I hear what you say on gender. I saw some IFS analysis on the kind of the impact of lockdown and how women were reducing their total number of hours, and were much more likely to be doing interrupted hours, i.e. doing work and then dealing with childcare. So, very fair point. Minister, final thoughts from you.
Thank you. I absolutely echo the issue around disability, and there's a cross-government work on this led by the Disabilities Minister, and each department is challenged on this, including BEIS, of course. Just on flexibility, I agree with Matthew on that, in the sense that it hopefully will help more women to be able to work. But I do think we need to sort of, again, not talk about employment in a sort of homogeneous way. So the sort of the knowledge economy, which is going to benefit from an uplift on R&D spend from where it is today at 11 billion a year to 22 billion. That's great. Back to sort of build in Britain. You know, we're still the 9th largest manufacturer in the world, and we want to maintain and grow that if we can. I do think there is an issue related to this at the lower end, at the sort of bottom end of the pay scale around child development. When I was the Children and Families Minister, we did some excellent work, especially actually with Greater Manchester, because obviously they're the sort of first part where we're integrating health and social care as part of the devolution agenda, which we haven't sort of touched upon in this brilliant call today. But we have child development and back to good work. You know, the gap that we need to address, because partly of the COVID challenge, but partly because the lower paid
in work poverty
find it much more difficult. And there's some really good work being done in Greater Manchester because of that integration, to be able to track and then focus resources on those families, on those parents, mothers that need that additional help on child development is crucial before the gap widens too far for us to do something about.
Brilliant, great stuff. And this session will be on YouTube, so you can rewatch it, but it was a really rich and great discussion. So thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you for your time and thoughts. Just to say, I was particularly struck by Matthew's comments about the importance of you know, autonomy, community, progression, development in work. And we spend so much of our lives, our working week and our whole working lives in work, that it's such a noble thing to aspire to. And I always think, you know, as Matthew said, that's more available to people higher up the income scale. And I think conservatism is at its best and most inspiring when it tries to take the very best institutions and experiences in life and widen it to as many people as possible. And I think we need to be thinking about that with work and employment as well. How can we make that sort of purposeful, progressive, autonomous work widely available to as many people as possible? And I think that's something the Conservative government should really think about post-COVID. Just to say, Bright Blue, we're doing a bit of a relaunch this autumn for those of you who've been paying attention. And we'll be launching some new research themes very soon, 7 new research themes, one of which is rewarding work. And in particular, we're doing a project on working from home and the kind of inequalities that might arise by sector or social group, different types of people finding some challenges with that. So we're going to be doing some research analysis and suggesting some policy proposals. So look out for that. The next Past the Pandemic event, which we're doing, is next week, and that's on reforming Whitehall. And obviously, there's lots of changes going on in Whitehall as we speak, for those of you who've been watching the news. So please do tune into that. We have Nick Timothy, the former Chief of Staff to the Prime Minister, Baroness Finn, who's a non-executive director of the Cabinet Office, and Lord Herbert, Nick Herbert, who's leading a big commission on smart governance. Please do sign up for that. So finally, a big thank you to HP for partnering with us on the event and this whole event series, and a big thank you for your time and your thoughts to the speakers. A virtual round of applause to you, but we are very grateful for your time. Thank you very much.